Hey, what's up everyone and welcome to Daily Code Buffer. In this video, we are going to talk about the test containers and how we can use those test containers for testing our applications. So first of all, before understanding test containers, let's understand how we do our unit testings and integration testing in our application. So suppose this is your Spring Boot application. For this Spring Boot application, what you would be having is you would be having different layers to it, right? So one would be your controller layer, one would be your service layer, and what would be your repository layer or your DAO layer, right? So you can see that you have different layers. One would be your UI layer as well, where you are building UI within your Spring Boot application. So that is also a part of it. Okay, so these are the different layers to it. And for each and every layers, what you do is you do the unit testings, right? For each and every layer, we will do the unit testing. And generally what we do is we do the unit testing for each and every layer separately, right? And whatever the different layers that we are going to use, we mock those layers. So suppose if you are going to test this repository layer, then what we do is we mock the request to the database. So we generally don't insert or get anything from the database. We don't have the actual connections to the database, but we mock that there is a database. So whatever I'm saving, that is completely mocked, and I will check whatever the code I have written is correctly working or not. Okay, so that is how we are going to mock this repository layer. If I'm working on the service layer, then I will mock this repository layer, right? So whatever the data or whatever the methods that I'm going to call from this repository layer, those particular methods will be mocked and I'll get a particular response from it, and I'll test my service layer. Similarly, I will do the same thing for my controller layer as well. So whenever from the controller layer, I'm going to call this service layer, I'll mock this service layer, and whatever the methods that I'm going to call from here and whatever the data that I'm going to get, those will be mocked, and particularly that data will be returned back and this particular layer will be tested. So this is how generally we do. But sometimes we also want to do the integration test, right? So at that time what we do the integration test for your controllers, so that will in return call your service layer and repository layers, right? So all those layers will be actually be called, and all this data will be created in your database or your whatever data access layer would be. Either it is your database, your MongoDB, your Redis, your Kafka, anything, right? So actual data will be processed there. Either those will be in your lower environment or whatever the environment that you are using. Suppose if you want to use the same thing in your higher environments and you want to do the actual testing, whatever the environment is there in your production, the same testing you want to do, but you do not want to spoil your DB as well. You do not want to add any extra records or whatever in your database, then at that time test containers comes into picture. So what test container will do is test container will give you a test environment to test whatever you want to test for your applications. Whatever flows that you want to test, we can have the test environments. So ideally, suppose I want to test my repository layer. Okay, so within this repository layer, what I do generally is I mock my DB. Now, when we are using the test containers, what we can do is for this repository layer, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually run a Docker container. Okay, I'm actually going to run a Docker container for what? I'm going to run the Docker container for what I want to test. This is my repository layer, and for this repository layer, I want to test my database. Either it's your database or your MongoDB, Redis, whatever you want to test. Okay, here in this case, I'm taking the example of MySQL. I want to test MySQL, like whatever the connections that I'm going to create, whatever the queries that I'm going to run, whatever the data I'm going to insert, I want those particular to be inserted as it is a real production environment. Okay, how it's going to behave in the production environment, that is what I want to mimic here in testing. So that's why I'll spin up the actual MySQL container to be testing my entire application. So with this Docker, I will spin up MySQL. Okay, so this MySQL will be used against testing my entire repository layer. Okay, so repository layer will know that, okay, I want to test this repository against what? Against this test container that I'm going to create, I'm going to configure in the application. So this test container will be created. All your queries, all your application, all your test cases will run against that container, and everything will be validated, and that container can be shut down. Okay, that's how it will work. So let's take that example and let's see actually how we can do this. What we'll do is we'll go through the code which generally we do, and we will convert that into a test containers, and how we can use that we will understand. So let's go to the IntelliJ IDEA. Okay, so within this IntelliJ IDEA, you can see that I have one demo application, that is a test containers demo. Within this, I have general stuffs. I have controller, entities, model, repository, and service layer. And within the controller, I have a basic controller. Okay, that's the employee controller. What it will do is it will have the different APIs. Those different APIs are creating the employees, getting all the employees, getting employees per ID, and deleting those employees. Okay, and for each and every methods here, there is a service layer. Okay, there is a service layer which will be called from your controller, and this service layer will have the actual business logic. And for this service layer, there is a repository layer. That repository layer will be called, okay, this is a employee repository. So this is a employee repository will be called, which extends API repository and which will allow us to do all the database operations. And for this application, we have used MySQL as a DB. Okay, so if I show you the application.properties, here you can see that we have added all the database URL, password, username, and everything here, and we are connecting to my local host database, and I have created the employee DB as a database. If I show you MySQL here you can see that I have created the employee DB database. Okay, so that's the general application that you can create. So I've just created this general application where all the different APIs are there. Now for the controller layer, what we do is we generally write the test cases, right? Integration test. So I have written the integration test for my controller as well. So here you can see that for the employee controller, we have written the test, and this is a Spring Boot test, and we are going to use any random port because this is the entire integration test which will call the actual APIs and everything will be run. Okay, and we are going to use the mock MVC for that. So here you can see that there are a couple of methods that we have used. That is a test save employee method and test get all employees method. So what it will do is, first this particular test case will be run, and here you can see that we are creating the object of the employee and we are mocking that request. Okay, this is the URL API/v1/employees. This is the content type, and I'm passing the entire employee object as a JSON string. And what I'm testing is that the status should be okay and it should have some data to it. Okay, so what this API will do is this API will call our controller layer. Again, it will call our service layer and repository layer, and this data will be saved in my database. Okay, my actual database. And this particular method will test that whatever that data has been saved, if I'm able to get it, there should be more than one record available because I have already saved that one record here. So that's the general test case I have written. So if I have to run this test case, let me run this test case. And here you can see that my test case is running, and you can see that both the test cases are completed. And here you can see that the Hibernate insert into employee. Okay, so the insert was called here, and for this select was called. Okay, so now if I go to my database, okay, and if I refresh here, so here you can see that the table is created because we have defined employee entity, right? So this table has been created for that. And if I have to run the query, here you can see that one record is also created, that is the test first, test last. So whatever this test case was, that test case has been created. So if I have to run this again, okay, so I ran this again. Now you can see that test case is completed, it is passed. And if I have to query it again, you can see that the new record is created. So that means whenever I'm running this test cases, it is spoiling my database as well. Though test case is completely working fine, it's complete end-to-end integration test, but it's spoiling my DB as well. Instead of this, what I want to do is I want to use the test containers, and my application should test each and everything against that test container. Okay, so let's take this basic example and let's use the test container for MySQL here. So for implementing the test container, that's the framework, right? So we have to add the dependencies for that. So we have to go to our pom.xml file and we have to add the dependencies for that. So basically how I get the test dependencies is, currently if you see, my Spring Boot version is 3.1.3, okay, and Java version is 17. So this is my basic application. So generally to get the new dependency versions, I directly use the Spring initializer. So let's go to that. So what we'll do is we'll go to start.spring.io. I'll add the dependency and I'll add the test containers. Okay, so here you can see that it provides lightweight, throwaway instances of common databases, Selenium, web browser, or anything else that can run in a Docker container. So anything you want that can be run in a Docker container, you can use that. There are multiple options available. You can go through the documentation as well and you will get a lot of information. Okay, so this is something that we are going to use. So I'll just click on add here. I'll convert to Maven project because it's our Maven project, and I'll just explore here and you will get the dependencies. So these are the dependencies. This is your basic dependency test container, and you need this JUnit Jupyter for your test containers. So I'll just copy these two things. I'll go to the pom.xml file and I will add these dependencies here. Okay, and I'll just reload my Maven project. So now my test container dependencies has been added. Now there is a dependency that you need to add for your drivers for your database as well, like whatever you want to use. Here I'm using MySQL, so I need to add the MySQL dependencies for your test containers as well. If you're using MongoDB, you can add MongoDB. If you're using Redis, there's a dependency for Redis also available. So whatever you're going to use, that dependency also you need to add. So we're going to add for the MySQL as well. So this is the dependency for MySQL test containers. Okay, just Google it and you will get it. Okay, it's all the things available in the documentation as well. Now you can see that I have added 3 dependencies, that is the test containers for Spring Boot, JUnit test containers, and MySQL test containers. Okay, now I want to use the MySQL against it. So what I'll do is I'll go to my test cases, employee controller test. Okay, and here I want to test it. So first thing what you need to do is you need to make sure that this particular employee controller test knows that this is going to use the test containers. So I'll annotate this with test containers. Okay, so this is the first thing, that now this class is going to use the test containers, and we annotated with this with test containers. Now which container to use, that is also we need to define. Okay, so we are going to define that we are going to use the MySQL container. Okay, you can see that this is the MySQL container from test containers. This is what I want to use, and I'm going to say this as a MySQL. Okay, equals to new MySQL container. Now within this you need to pass which Docker image that you want to use. So for MySQL, if you go to the Docker website, you will get the MySQL. So that is something that we want to use. So if I have to search it, so if I go here and if I say MySQL Docker, okay, so this is a MySQL official image, and here you can use any of it. Okay, so we are going to use this 8.1.0 as a MySQL. So I can directly copy this, and within this container I can define, here you can see that it's asking the Docker image name. So I'm giving MySQL colon 8.1.0. Okay, so this is the Docker image that it's going to use. Now we have defined the container as well. Now as this is a container, we need to annotate this with container as well. So this container is from org test containers JUnit. So now Spring will know that this is the container that I'm going to use. Now this is also done. Now whenever you are working with a remote service, this is a remote service, right? Your MySQL is a remote service. Now your application should connect to it. So for that you need to provide what is the URL, your username, password, whatever, everything that is available. So whatever you have defined here, right, in application.properties, that is where you need to connect to what is the username, password, and everything, you have to similarly define for your test as well, because that's a new MySQL container that you started, right? So those properties also you need to define. Correct, right? So that is what we are going to do using the dynamic source properties of Spring Boot. So Spring Boot allows you to add the dynamic properties at the test runtime. Okay, so that feature we are going to use to add all this property there. So we'll go to the test controller. Okay, and what we are going to do is we are going to create a static method here, void dynamic configuration. Okay, and all this dynamic configuration will come from dynamic properties registry. Okay, and we need to annotate this method with dynamic property source. So now all these properties, whatever we define, it will take from here. So now for this registry, whatever the dynamic property registry is there, right? So here within this registry, we need to add some properties as well. Okay. And those properties will be registry.add. Here you can see that we need to pass name and the supplier. So we are going to add what? We are going to add this one, Spring data source URL. Okay. And from where we need to add? We need to add from MySQL container, and from MySQL container we can get the URL. You can see get JDBC URL. Okay. And now here you can see that as this is the supplier, we can use the method reference. Okay. And we need to remove this. Similarly, I need to pass username and I need to pass password as well. Okay. So I'll just copy this one and I'm going to use username and I'm going to use the password as well. Okay. And from here get username and get password. Okay. So now these are the default things. So if you go to the MySQL container, here you can see that your database name, username, password, those you can see all these things are defined. These are the default values. But suppose you want to define some different values, that also you can do. So suppose if you want to give the different name, right? So here when you are initiating the MySQL container, you want to give the different name of your DB, then you can do with colon with database name. So here you can define different database name. Similarly, you can give your different username. You can see all these different methods are available. So different username is there, different password is there, all these things, different command is there, right? So all the things that you can modify. So whatever you want to do, however you want to configure your database, your containers, that you can do. So whatever configuration that you have added in your production environment, similarly you can add here, so you will exactly mimic what you're going to do. Okay. So these are all the parameters available. You can add and configure each and everything. We will go with the default values here. So now here all the default values will come from here. Okay. So now you can see that we have added the configuration. So now let's run the application and let's see what happens. So, and one thing we need to remember is this everything runs against the Docker environment. So you need to have the Docker client installed as well. So what we will do is we will start the Docker environment as well in our machine. So here you can see that Docker desktop is starting and it is started. Okay. So now let's run the application. And let's see the logs as well. So here you can see that it is creating the MySQL container, see, and it is waiting for database connection to be available. So you can see that I already had that image available. So that's why it is not downloading the image. But if I don't have the image available, it will download the image from the Docker registry and it will instantiate the container as well. So you can see that both the test cases has been passed and this new entry will be done in the database that we have created, that is the test container. So those entries now will not be available in my actual database. So if I run this, you can see that there is only 2 entries. There is no new entry. If I have to run this again, it will run again as well. So now if you are sharing this application to anyone and they directly want to run MVN clean install, it will directly work without any issue for them, right? Because everything has been set with the test containers. Cool, right? So you can see that everything is working completely fine. Similarly, you can use for any environment as well. And suppose if you want to use for your API gateways, for your different services available, right? Because we are working with the microservices world, there are multiple services available as well. So if you want to connect with different services, for that also you can create the generic containers. And with that generic containers, you can define like whatever the APIs that you want to connect to, and accordingly it will connect to that and it will get the data for you. Okay, so there is a lot of things that you can do with the test containers. Now there is one more thing also we can do here. Okay, as we are using Spring Boot 3.1.0 and above version, so from that version there is an auto configuration magic available for the test containers. So here you can see that we have defined the properties, right? Like these are the default properties you can use, right? So as there is already default properties, right, available, so from Spring Boot 3.1 version, Spring can directly understand, okay, these properties are default there and developer has not defined any custom properties, then why to take this code from the developer itself. We can directly handle it, right? So rather than that, I can omit this out. Okay, I can comment it out, and there is a new service connection available. So now with this particular annotation, Spring Boot knows that this is the service connection, this is the remote service that I want to connect to, and for this it will kick in the auto configuration, and all these properties whatever we have set here, it will work directly out of the box. Cool, right? So this is the new addition from Spring 3.1.0. So now let's run this again and let's see if it works or not. And here you can see that it is starting our database, and here you can see that it is working. So all my test cases also pass now. So now you can see that you don't have to provide the default configuration as well. It will directly pick from the service connection. Okay, so this way you can add for multiple things. One more thing you can do is you can configure this test containers for your development environment as well. So suppose you want to use some databases, right, and you want your application to directly run without setting up anything, then you can set up all these test containers for your development environment as well using your dev tools and your test containers. Okay, so there are a lot of things available you can do with test containers, and you can go through the documentation to know more, but this is the basic steps that you need to follow. You have to define your test containers. Your test case should know that this is a test containers, this is going to use the test containers, and whatever the containers that you want to use, you can define all those containers, and whatever the properties that you want to do, whatever the commands that you want to run at the startup, all those things you can define. There are a lot of different APIs available to work with the test containers. So find a way to use these test containers in your application and tag me in the comment section below, like where you are going to use it and how you benefited from this test containers. So this was all about the test containers. I will add the project link in the description below for you to check out. If you have any doubts regarding any of the things that we have covered, then ask me in the comment section below. If you like this video, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for the upcoming videos. You can also click on the join button to support my channel. I will see you in the next video. Till then, happy coding. Bye bye.